So there are many critics of the inflation targeting policy framework, and some of their criticisms are valid. I'll touch on a few of them. Some of the critics say, if you look at inflation in South Africa, a significant proportion of it is actually driven by what we call administered prices. What are administered prices? These are prices of goods and services that are controlled by the government. Let me give you an example. Electricity prices have gone up over 500% in the past 10 years. That's not 6% per annum. Who controls electricity prices? It's Eskom, a government-owned company. Yeah? Similarly, municipal rates, similarly, water. There are a whole host of administered prices which have gone up above 6% per annum. Prices controlled by government. They are feeding into inflation, and the Reserve Bank and the MPC are forced to respond to that. So some of the critics say, hold on, we are penalizing South African consumers, South African businesses, when a significant proportion of our inflation is actually driven by the government, and consumers have very little control over that. Another big criticism of this inflation targeting policy framework is that we are subject to exogenous shocks. Right? Exogenous shocks. What are exogenous shocks? External shocks. So in South Africa, for instance, we have a floating exchange rate, and the rand is very, very volatile. And that frequently causes us to import inflation if the rand depreciates significantly. Because we are running a floating exchange rate, no one can actually control what the exchange rate is going to be. And the critics argue, because of these external shocks driven by the exchange rate, which cause inflation to go up, this inflation targeting policy framework is inappropriate. In addition, oil prices are a big factor in our inflation. So we import about 40% of oil for petrol and diesel, etc. The oil price goes up and down regardless of what's going on in South Africa. So critics argue that inflation might spike because of oil prices and the Reserve Bank may respond, but actually inflation is not being driven by events in the local economy. And oil prices or commodity prices extend to even food prices. So the critics point out external or exogenous shocks and administered prices as key failures or weaknesses in this inflation targeting policy framework. And they've got some valid points. Here's the challenge. They haven't put forward an alternative that takes into account the benefits of inflation targeting, but also addresses some of the concerns they have. They haven't done that, so they haven't been given much credibility as a result of that.